This is Stephen Bradley, and you're listening to the Power Chord Hour.
There's another one you don't want to hear. Frankly, if you want.
1, 2, 3, set, go.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Power Chord Hour podcast, episode 6 to be exact. And I'm your host, Anthony Merchant. Thank you so much for checking out another episode. This has been such a blast to do. I mean, I've been doing the radio show now this week, actually. I mean, if you're listening to this when it comes out, this week, like the third week of February. This week, 4 years ago, was when we started doing the Power Chord Hour. And I guess as we, I mean me, because I'm basically everything of the Power Chord Hour, whether it's putting the playlist together, getting the interviews, kind of choosing who I want to interview, writing the questions, putting everything together, obviously hosting this. I do it all, and I've been doing it now for 4 years, doing the radio show. But the podcast is so fun, it's such a different avenue. It's, I feel like it's still connected to the Power Chord Hour radio show. Thus, we still use the Power Chord Hour name because I feel like it's still the same show, but a different side of it. So it's been really fun to do. It's kind of like a new challenge. As you do the show after 4 years, I'm by no means the greatest broadcaster of all time, nor is the Power Chord Hour radio show like the greatest radio show of all time. But I think after a while, you do kind of find your footing a little more, and you get a little more used to it and everything. So doing the podcast is fun because it keeps me on my toes more. It's something different. I talk a whole lot more. I have to do, kind of more prep on what I'd like to talk about, and different subject matters, all that stuff. So it's just been a total blast to do it, and I've said it the last few episodes, but really, episode 6 now, it's crazy to think we've had this many. And it's funny, we had another episode. We're still at episode 6, but originally I did have a guest for this week, and some things happened, and I won't get really into it, but some things happened around it, and you will not be hearing the original episode 6 or the little bit that got recorded. But we'll get some stuff situated, and I'm sure we'll have a guest on again very, very soon. But I hate to kind of be vague about it, but I won't throw anyone under the bus. Kind of a funny situation, kind of funny as long as you don't use people's names, we'll say. But this will be the new episode 6. It's not even like you'll notice that it's any different, but it is. Me and the guest I had on, we're talking about something totally different. But I wanted to get something out for you for this week. Wanted to keep doing the podcast. I would like to keep doing it weekly. I'd like to. I've missed a few weeks here and there so far, but I like to try to keep it weekly. So I wanted to come on, and one of the things I was thinking about, lately, including with the radio show, I try to look at like things that were released, in certain months, and kind of whether it's new music or old music. And 2 releases that stuck out to me that were released in February, 2 different years, but back in the 90s, if we're going to time travel a little bit here. But in February of 1994 and February of 1999, we got, in my opinion, like two of like the best albums of the 90s. They are up there as quintessential 90s records, I think. But kind of what's interesting about them, and I think when I tell you the 2 records that I'm talking about, you probably will be like, oh yeah, like totally, like I get that. They're 2 records that are huge in like within their respective genres, and like with people who listen to them, but they're not like they basically have like what the Replacements had, where like they never sold a lot of records. But what they had instead were these albums that kind of get that cult status, that are like loved. Like, a million people don't own that album, but, 300,000 do, and every single person who ever bought it, all 300,000 of those people love that album. It's kind of one of those things. But the 2 records, released in February 7th, 1994 was Jawbreakers' 24-Hour Revenge Therapy, my second favorite Jawbreaker record, and a very, very important one, I think, to the band. One I think very well worth talking about. And then a few years later, and a few years after Jawbreaker had broken up, I think at this point Jets to Brazil would have been a band, probably had an album or two out. But on February 23rd, 1999, going up a few years, Jimmy Eat World's Clarity, my all-time favorite Jimmy Eat World record, one of my just all-time favorite records. And I mean, just so, just such a good record. I mean, these are two albums that I feel like I could talk about forever. And, it's funny with them because I feel like they're similar in many ways. Like if you like one of them, you probably like the other one. Like there's a good chance. But at the same time, sonically, they don't sound alike. You know what I mean? Just look at the two album openers. I mean, from 24 Hour Revenge Therapy, The Boat Dreams from the Hill, versus Jimmy Eat World with Table for Glasses. I mean, both great album openers, but it's like so different. I mean, Boat Dreams from the Hill, it kicks you in the face the second that Adam starts that record with that snare, that like snare fill or whatever you want to call it that he does. And I mean, they just go right into it with the power chords, just talk about a trio who really, you really listen to those records, and it's like, for being three musicians, I mean, some of those songs sound huge. I mean, they really, and I mean, obviously in the studio you can layer things and stuff. Like, I mean, going to the other Jawbreaker record, my favorite, Dear You, I mean, if you listen to a song like Accident Prone, I mean, to me, when someone says Wall of Guitars, that's the song I think of, the chorus specifically. It's really that buildup. Because obviously that song is also, another great example of the quiet verses and the super heavy choruses, just like Nirvana or the Pixies, or, a very popular thing, I feel like in the 90s, late 80s, which I still love. I'm always a fool for that. I mean, I think that's part of what I really liked about Title Fight, too, when they came out, is they had a lot of songs like that. Like, even though, they're putting them out in, just a few years ago, really, like 2011 and like 2014 and whatnot. Putting out those records that kind of sonically did the same thing that these albums did, like Jawbreaker and like Jimmy Eat World, where, you would kind of get teased, you know what I mean? Like, there's that build up, something's coming, and then the chorus hits you. You know what I mean? Like I absolutely love that. I'm a fool for it. And that's why I love that there's so many bands now who I think try to emulate 90s bands. I mean, there's constant. I feel like every week there's a new band that, is like, quote unquote, like a 90s throwback band to but the alternative stuff like Hum and like Jawbreaker and like Jimmy Eat World. And I mean, kind of the bands that weren't like selling millions and millions of records, but were huge, like I was saying earlier, in their respective genres. And I mean, I think 24 Hour Revenge Therapy and Clarity, both of those, like they never sold a ton. Neither of those records are even gold. I'm sure Clarity has sold more than 24 Hour Revenge Therapy. I'm just assuming that, but I mean, that I would say that would probably be the case, because I mean, like, I don't think there are any real singles on 24 Hour Revenge Therapy. I mean, like, there's the quote unquote singles. Like, I think everyone would say Boxcar, but I mean, that's like a fan favorite more than like a single, like the few Jawbreaker singles I think were all mostly on Dear You. But with Jimmy Eat World, I mean, like, they did have a minor hit with Lucky Denver Mint. I think that was the only song on, and that did rhyme. I must acknowledge that rhymed. But on Clarity, I think Lucky Denver Mint was the only single off that. But I mean, it was a minor radio hit. And I mean, even to this day, like, it's far from, obviously the middle is like normally the one you hear. And then I'd say the second one you hear the most is like Sweetness. But I have heard Lucky Denver Mint a few times on the radio, whereas Jawbreaker, the only time I've heard Jawbreaker on the radio is when I've listened to my own show. So, I mean, like, I'm sure Clarity has sold more, but it's like, still, it did not sell a ton. And I mean, you have to remember at the time, Clarity was a major label record, but Jimmy Eat World got dropped after that one. I believe it was on Capitol. They were still on Capitol for that one, and that was their last. I mean, before they ended up, with Bleed American, they ended up on another major label, but I mean, they got dropped after Clarity. So Clarity obviously did not sell well when it came out, and it's just like, I think Jawbreaker. I mean, Jawbreaker being, and you're seeing it now as Jawbreakers reunited, but it's like, Jawbreaker, never a huge band when they were first around. I think, from what I've heard, Like I think they pulled in a decent amount. Like it's one of those things where it's like they did good for like a punk band in the Bay Area. Like maybe they filled Gilman Street, but it's like, they're probably not filling, more than maybe 100 kids a night in like other cities around the country. I think that was kind of the thing. I mean, they were broken up by the time 24 Hour Revenge Therapy came out when I was 2. So, I obviously was not there to see the band the first time around. I had to catch them. I've caught them a few times on the reunion shows, which they just sound amazing. They absolutely sound great. But, we're not huge the first time around, and I don't think 24 Hour Revenge Therapy was that big. I mean, it was big enough to get a label's attention, Geffen Records, where they ended up putting Dear You out, which also ended up, being on a major label. I think anyone who knows Jawbreaker, obviously, famously or infamously, basically broke up because of that. I mean, there were other factors, but it's like they signed to a major label. People were shitting on them before like any music even got released. Then Dear You got released. Fans hated it, and whether they didn't like the album itself, or I think a lot of them just didn't like it because it was on a major label. Like, you know what I mean? Like, Dear You is different enough, like, than 24 Hour Revenge Therapy. Like, it's not 24 Hour Revenge Part 2, but I don't think it's anything that, like, most people would go, oh, this is not good. Like, they were going in a great direction. I'm sure there's some people who genuinely didn't like the direction they went in, but I would say the majority of the people who didn't like Dear You were probably just the same people who were, like, sitting down or turning their backs when the band would play those songs live because it was on a major label. It's just one of those things that we don't deal with present day. Like, I feel like probably the last band that really got that, such a big thing in the 90s, like punk bands signed to major labels, but I really feel like probably the last band to really get the brunt of that was Against Me. I mean, for years, that's all Laura Jane Grace, like in interviews, that's all she would have to talk about. I mean, do you feel like you sold out, or did you, like, how do you feel about the backlash of this or that? And like, but I've also heard her say, like, it's funny because, the major label, they got shit for that, but it's like they were saying even before that, like, you go back even further, and from going from No Idea Records to Fat Records, there were people who were like, oh my God, like, you guys are sellouts, which is just absolutely funny. And, I mean, now I guess that was probably like 15 years ago. You think like New Wave, I mean, it's crazy to think that New Wave's had to be out now since like 2005, 2006 got released. So, I mean, yeah, that was about 15 years ago that like, I feel like we had the last real, like, oh, these people are sellouts. You know what I mean? Like, this band's a sellout. They signed to a major label and they polished their sound, and now they have singles and they're touring with with these bands and stuff. But it's even like you look at Jawbreaker, and it's even crazier because I don't even think Jawbreaker was doing that. Like, I mean, some of the, and I'm not like justifying this because I love Against Me, and I think New Wave's one of their best albums. So I mean, I'm far from one of the people who, are like, oh, you guys are sellouts, which I couldn't say that anyways because I didn't discover them until after New Wave came out and they were already on a major label. So I couldn't even say it if I wanted to. But like, it's funny because if you even compare, certain bands like that, like compare Jawbreaker to Against Me with like the whole sellout factor. It's like with Against Me, they got it because they're on a major label, but they were also getting shit because, it was a polished album, and, I think they were touring with different bands. Like, like I think they did a tour with like maybe Mastodon, which is like, yeah, I mean, they probably wouldn't have done that maybe 5 years prior, like just different things like that where like they, like, once again, I'm not justifying people like going like, oh yeah, band sold out or this or that, but I'm saying like, you start piling on these different reasons why people would say that about Against Me, where with Jawbreaker, I feel like got it even worse than Against Me probably, or at least just about as equally. And they really didn't, I mean, besides signing to a major label, I don't think they ever really did like any crazy tours. Like, I mean, they toured with Nirvana, and that's after, that's when they inevitably got signed to a major label from after touring with Nirvana, but that's like it. There was no real, like, I don't think there were any like tours that they did with like some band of the day that was also like on Geffen that wouldn't make sense. You know what I mean? Like, Jawbreaker wasn't going on tour with Deep Blue something or like the Gin Blossoms or something like that. Like, nothing out of the ordinary. Like, they didn't all of a sudden stop like playing with like lookout bands and like, all those punk bands from the Bay, the Bay Area from the late 80s, early 90s. Like, it's not like they stopped playing with J Church and started playing with just major label bands or like anything like that. Like, they just didn't do that. Like, they just signed to a major label. And I mean, the record is like, it's polished in a way. I guess it's funny though too, because this also has to do with when it was released, because I forget about this. I listened to it years after it came out, but Dear You at the time was an expensive recording, and it did cost a lot of money, and it was at the time, I think, pretty well produced. But it's funny because you listen back now and it's like, I don't think it sounds terrible, but it's far from what you'd call state of the art. It's kind of the same thing. I think a lot of albums fall victim to their era, and not even that Dear You falls victim to that, because I don't think it sounds bad. I just think it's funny. It's funny when you think about it and you go, it was like a big production and it cost, like there was a big budget and stuff. Where you look now and you go, how did that album cost like that much to record? But I think it's kind of like that, though. I think this album suffers sonically too, but it's like, I think Purple Rain is one of those where it's like with Prince's Purple Rain, at the time, probably super expensive to make. Like, those electronic drums and stuff were state of the art. It was probably very expensive to do, but those drums sound terrible now. You know what I mean? Like, and the songs are still great. It's also a testament to how, good Prince is at those songs. That's still such a killer soundtrack, but it's like, it's dated in a way where it's like, yeah, they probably spent all that money at the time and it was probably great at that time, but 40 years later or 30 something years later, the sound doesn't hold up the same. It's like, oh yeah, that's pretty dated. And it's like, you forget, but that cost a ton of money, including in a day now where, like I've talked to so many musicians and producers on here that, talk about how you can record these albums in your bedroom and it sounds, it sounds amazing. Like, it's crazy what you can do. So it's funny kind of looking back at something like Jawbreakers' Dear You and going like, that was an expensive record to make. And it's like, there's nothing on it that crazy. I mean, even production-wise, it's like there's not there's some really good guitar tones. And like I was talking about earlier with with Accident Prone, like the wall of sound with the guitars in the chorus. Like, I mean, there's like things like that where, it's like pretty well produced, but they're not like adding like, all this extra stuff. There's not like extra session players coming in or like a string section, like nothing like that. So, it's just kind of crazy to think of. Now, on 24 Hour Revenge Therapy, they did work with Steve Albini, which, very, very legendary producer. And I really do like what he did on it. I mean, Jawbreakers is one of my favorite bands, so maybe it's a no-brainer that it's like probably my favorite Steve Albini produced record. But it's like, I really like it because what he did really well, I think, was he polished them enough where they sounded good, but they still sounded like Jawbreaker. And I think, like, I don't think he changed them too much. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like even like, say, Chesterfield King, that song could be on 24 Hour Revenge Therapy, I feel like, and it would still fit in because I don't feel like they changed that much. I don't feel like Steve did too much with it to make them sound like, I mean, like I would say this, like on 24 Hour Revenge Therapy, to me, there's definitely, and I think it's a lot of the chord progressions that Blake uses, but it's like, to me, it sounds very much like Lookout, like what was going on in the Bay Area and like with Lookout Records and early Green Day and stuff. I mean, by 1994, I mean, that would like Dookie would have been out. It's like around Dookie, but even like the Lookout era of Green Day, like I think Jawbreaker sounds most similar, and I don't mean it like they sound like Green Day on 24 Hour Revenge Therapy, but if there's a record where I would go, they sound, like they both sound like that, they have that Bay Area sound, they're very similar, I would say that. I mean, including Dookie and 24 Hour Revenge, which I can't think of his last name, Rob Cavallero. I mean, very, very famous producer, but it's funny because as I say that, he produced Green Day's Dookie, and then he produced Jawbreakers' Dear You, the following Jawbreaker record. But I think they sound less like Green Day on Dear You, where I feel like 24 Hour Revenge, once again, I hate even saying that they sound like them, but I just feel like that's when they most, both of them kind of had that, which now you look back and go, that Bay Area punk sound, or the Lookout, also that, like the Lookout Records sound. Because that's the other thing, like with Green Day, like people who have never who have never heard the other bands that were like on Lookout Records at the time. Like you listen to Dookie and it's like, I mean, I love Dookie and it makes sense that it sold so many damn records. But like the interesting thing about Green Day is like what they were doing wasn't totally different from what all the other Lookout bands were doing. You know what I mean? Like you look at like what the Queers were doing or the Mr. T Experience, like there's a lot of other Lookout bands at the time who I feel like were doing the same thing, but never even got a shred of that success. Like even half of, what Green Day did. Same with like Screeching Weasel. I mean, Screeching Weasel, kind of the forefathers, kind of paved the way for bands like Green Day. And even them, like, they did okay. I mean, they did well. I shouldn't even say okay. They did good for a punk band, but it's like never. It's kind of weird how Green Day was really the only one from that like Lookout, roster to really hit it big like that when there's so many other bands who were doing that as well, were doing their own style of it. But, I definitely think there was an East Bay sound, it would be East Bay, I believe, but just that whole Bay area, in the like kind of late 80s, early 90s, just really, really cool. And I don't feel like people talk about it enough or think about it. You start thinking about the bands in it. I think part of it's like that. Like Green Day's just so big that I feel like they don't get attached to things like that. Like you kind of look back and just go, oh, Green Day's Dookie or whatever, but you don't go like, that band just blew up and they were playing Gilman Street with like Crimp Shine and I guess Op Ivy was probably broken up by then, but I know like all of them loved Op Ivy and went and saw them when they were playing, the Lookouts that Trey Cool played in when he was a little kid and he was like 12, kind of like Tommy Stinson with the Replacements. Like there's a specific sound from that time in that area. And I think people kind of forget that. But I would say, I mean, Dookie's a great defining one. And I also think 24-Hour Revenge Therapy. I think this is another really good one of like, that sound in that place, which is also kind of funny because then you listen to the lyrics and it's like, obviously, there's kind of a love-hate relationship there with Jawbreaker and the scene. I mean, the Boxcar, pick a song. I mean, Boxcar is the most, like, obviously like the blatantly most obvious one of like the punk scene and kind of the distaste for it. But I mean, there's so many songs on there that, just those great snotty lyrics that, Blake writes so well that, is just kind of like a fuck you to the scene and, the people in it that he didn't like. And, and I'm sure that like with Jawbreaker, once again, maybe they weren't huge at the time, but I feel like they were probably respected like their peers and stuff. And they're just one of those, they were one of those like bands who, as far as the scene went, I mean, we're doing what was going on so well, but they didn't want to play the game. I don't think they were ever one to play the game or play into trends and stuff. So it's like, I think they probably rubbed other bands the wrong way because they had integrity and they wanted to do their own thing. I don't think they ever like conformed to any of that stuff. They played the shows, they played a lot of the same venues, and there were bands that, I mean, obviously mutual friends and stuff. Like not like every band hated them or anything, but I just mean like it's funny because as I'm saying that, like they really do have such a defining sound, or so important to that like East Bay sound, yet I don't feel like they ever want to be connected to a scene. So it's kind of funny to connect them to a scene, but that's just how it goes. They write great songs, it's not my fault they wrote such a classic. And while Dear You is my favorite Jawbreaker record, 24-Hour Revenge Therapy to me is when they really kind of solidified being the punk band that we like know and love now. Like the fact that we wanted them to reunite all these years later, and they could, and that people were waiting for them to reunite. And I've always said this, I mean, Jawbreaker is one of my all-time favorite bands, but if they only ever released Unfun and Bivouac, I wouldn't look at them the same way, and I don't feel like other people would. I would look at them as a band, like a 90s punk band who had a couple, songs I really like. Because on those first two records, it's like, I mean, there's good songs on there, but that's the thing. There's good songs. I don't feel like those records coherently are like great records. And I don't think they're not even that bad. I just think they were more of the same, basically. They're more of the same of what was going on at the time. And I think they found their real sound. Like the reason why we love Jawbreaker now is from the last two records. I think it's a band who had time to find their sound, become more unique. And, I think that's where, like, it shows up in songs on the first two records. Like, don't get me wrong, there's some good songs there, but it's like they finally came into their own, I think, on 24-Hour Revenge Therapy, it's kind of crazy to think about too, because obviously we had 24 Hour Revenge, then we had Dear You, but it's so interesting to think of where they would have went next. You know, I mean, they just kept evolving, and it's like, where would that Jawbreaker sound have went after Dear You? You know, I mean, I feel like that's easy to do with most bands who break up, but you know, Jawbreaker is an interesting one because there is a back catalog. I mean, there's music to go back and check out, but it's also not huge. It's still like, you know, I really feel like I said, you know, they really came to their own on those last 2 records. So you kind of go, there's so much more they could have done, you know, like, I mean, like with Jimmy Eat World keeps going, and you see where they evolve, and, you know, we've seen where they've went and where they've went back to and all those things. But with Jawbreaker, we never really got that chance, you know, like after Dear You, it's like, I mean, you could probably say like Jets to Brazil, like maybe Jawbreaker would have sounded like that, you know, maybe the next album would have maybe sounded like that, but it's like you still kind of do that what could have been, you know. And I think Jawbreaker has teased since they've reunited. I think they've said that they've like written some songs. I mean, who knows? I don't think there's any real announcements for new music, but I mean, I would love to see what they put out present day. I mean, I think they could probably still write some really good songs. I think all those guys have played in other bands and have done really well and done a lot of cool stuff, you know, after. Like, actually, I didn't even realize, and I love Reviver, but I didn't even realize that Jawbreaker's bass player, Chris, played bass on, I forget what release it was. I think it was in 2016, one of Reviver's albums. But, like, I thought it was awesome. Like, I mean, all those guys in Jawbreaker have went on and done some really rad stuff after Jawbreaker, but, I mean, the Jawbreaker's the best. I mean, of everything they've done, it's like that band is just so good. You know what I mean? It's the reason why all these years later, 26 years later, I'm sitting here talking about that record, you know. There's a reason that it's worth going back and finding these albums, you know, from when I was way too young. You know what I mean? Like a 2-year-old, like I didn't know what Jawbreaker was. So it's like, you know, they put out good stuff. They put out things worth going back and hearing, you know, and really finding. And I think also, I mean, Jawbreaker's a punk band. They're also at times kind of a pop punk band, but it's like the cool thing about 24 Hour Revenge Therapy, because I think they kind of found their own sound, it's not, it changes, you know what I mean? Like there's different things in there. Like, I mean, probably one of the only punk records I've ever heard that has, you know, a Jack Kerouac sample in it, like, you know, things like that. And I mean, actually references Jack Kerouac multiple times. I guess there are punk bands who you know, mention Kerouac. That's not super uncommon punk, but you don't really hear samplings of like his spoken word and stuff. Like, I think that's the other thing that kind of set Jawbreaker aside is like, they were all kind of educated guys. Like, you know, they all, I don't know, I can't remember if they met in college, but they all went to college together. They were all, you know, I mean, all college educated. I know Blake was a teacher at times, you know, like throughout his life. I know he reads a lot. I mean, if you go see them live, even the stage banter in between, I mean, some of the literary references he makes and stuff, like, you know, he's a smart guy. He knows his stuff. And I think that's the other thing that kind of sets them aside. And the other thing I kind of get from it too is I was reading yesterday, getting ready to do this podcast, a interview that all 3 of them did last year for the 25th anniversary of 24 Hour Revenge. And you kind of get this thing of like, at that point, you know, they were a band for a while and they were by no means old guys, but, you know, I think at that point they were kind of mid to late 20s. And I think that was the thing, is I think that's the other part of it is they kind of talked about that in the interview, specifically Blake, but just kind of that in between of, we're not, you know, we don't really fit in with the really, really young crowd, you know, the 18, 19-year-olds, but we also don't fit in with like, you know, the really old crowd, you know what I mean? Like they also weren't like in their 40s, you know, they were still young guys, but they were kind of in that in between. And I think that's the other reason why this is so good. You know, they didn't really have a home in that sense. You know, they probably did feel kind of alienated from the younger bands. They also didn't, you know, feel the same connection with the older ones. And I think that's part of that as well. You know, it's a combination of being a band for a while and finding your sound, and then kind of that attitude, you know, bleeding into it, you know, the other politics in music that aren't just music, you know, kind of bleeding into it, like scene politics and things like that. And I mean, once again, it's Blake's writing as well, and you can hear it in that. I mean, the sarcasm in his lyrics. I mean, just look at Boxcar. I mean, like, you know, you're not punk, and I'm telling everyone. Like, I mean, that's what a way to open a song. Like, that grabs your attention the second you listen to it. Like, the first time you hear that song, like, you're hooked, because, like, that's what a great way to grab your attention, you know, which also, like I said, kind of going from, I think, being educated guys and kind of understanding that too, that idea of like grabbing one's attention in writing, whether it be music or in literature, and whether it be someone reading that, if you were reading the liner notes, that kind of catches you, but it also catches you if someone says it, including the way that Blake's saying it, just so good with his voice too. I think Steve has him really good in the mix on that record, where like, I think that's the thing I like about it is nothing. The way it's mixed is I don't feel like anything stands out more than anything else. Like it's almost, I feel like everything's kind of mixed at the same spot, meaning like, the bass doesn't overrule, or like drown out the guitar, the guitar, doesn't really drown out the drums, like nothing like that. And then I don't feel like the vocals are like overpowering everything. You know what I mean? It's not an album where like the vocals overpower the music. I feel like it's all kind of at the same spot and sounds really good. Nothing overpowers each other, and it just sounds like a strong trio, just playing really, really well together. And I mean, I think it was mixed well. I think it was produced well. Steve Albini obviously knows what he's doing, but yeah, easily my favorite Steve Albini produced record. I mean, In Utero is probably one of my probably like top 5. But I gotta go with 24 Hour Revenge is my favorite thing he's ever produced. And like I like his music. I like some shellac and stuff. I'm not a huge. I've never delved into everything he's done, but I like the guy enough. I think he's just one of those guys where he rubs people the wrong way, but I think he just got to go, and it's like that's just who he is. There's something about Illinois. I mean, because it's like Ben Weasel. I mean, Ben Weasel's the same way. I love Screeching Weasel, and it's like Ben Weasel's just a guy where it's like, I don't get when people get upset about some of the, like when he'll say things, like just because normally Ben Weasel will just say something very Ben Weasel-y, and it's like, I don't get how people have the reaction because like, but that's what he's doing because he knows he's good at it. You know what I mean? Like it's kind of the same thing with Steve Albini. Like if you listen to like an interview with him, like he was in the Jawbreaker documentary, Don't Break Down, for, I don't know, collectively, he was probably only in it for like a minute or two. But it's like, he would make little smart ass jokes and stuff like, oh yeah, I got the call to, like produce Jawbreaker and I thought they were that band Jawbox, just things like that. And it's like, but you have to expect that from him, that's kind of the charm of him. And it's kind of the same thing with Ben Weasel, that like that sharp tongue of his is kind of, part of his charm. It's like, if you let it rub you the wrong way, that's one thing, but it's like, you kind of know that's what he's going to be like. It's Steve Albini or, it's Ben Weasel. It's like, that's just kind of how they are. And Blake's kind of that way too, in a different way than Ben Weasel is, or even Steve Albini for that matter. I think kind of different, but also kind of that, like, I think just sharp wit and kind of also has a dry sense of humor that I think can go, like I was saying earlier with like his stage banter, like the way the Jawbreaker stage banter that he has a lot of times is like, it kind of takes you a second. It's like if you take it too literal, or you like listen to it, you just think he's really, really dry for like no reason. It's just, someone talking really dry. It's almost like nonsense. You kind of look at him like, what's wrong with this guy? But then you kind of realize like, oh no, like that's him. Like that's the humor. It's like, oh, okay. Like, no, you like him. It's like, that's his personality, and I think it comes out in the music as well with a Jawbreaker. Really all those guys too. I think most people who have that kind of like attitude, I guess, that it normally comes out in their music as well. I feel like a lot of those bands, I think the members, you end up getting attached. The members become attached to the music. It's not just a band of faceless people. And I do think Jawbreaker is one of those. Even as just a trio, like I think Blake Schwarzenbach, specifically, probably also for his lyrics. I mean, just one of the greatest lyricists. I think he's looked at just as lovingly as people look at Jawbreaker. It's not like they just look at Jawbreaker. They look at the members. They appreciate them. They appreciate what they do. It's not just a band, I feel like. And it goes back to, like I was saying, 24 Hour Revenge Therapy, not a gold record. I don't know what it sold, but I'm sure to this day it's easily sold under 100,000 records. Which is sad. It would be great if it sold more, but I mean, that's the case. But with that said, it is a cult classic. I mean, people love that album. It's one of those things too, where it's like, there's so many albums from 1994 that sold way more than Jawbreaker that if you went to the record store now, you just couldn't find. You would not find it. Or if you did, you might find like a used copy, whereas Jawbreaker with 24 Hour Revenge Therapy, that thing's still in press. People are still buying it. It's not a gold record, but it's like people appreciate it and people still love it, and it's that difference. It really is. I mean, it's the Replacements versus, I mean, really, if you even just thinking of the era of the Replacements, I mean, you could even just take like a hair band for that matter, and it's like it's the difference between a hair metal band in the 80s who at the time, got exposure on MTV, a bunch of interviews, sold millions of records, had a couple radio hits and were really big, who, 10, 15 years later either were broken up and no one remembers, or were still going and went from playing like arenas to like playing, half empty like dive bars and like C market places, like small towns or like B cities, like things like that. Whereas you have a band like the Replacements, who at that same time where that, where a hair metal band was like doing all that, the Replacements weren't making the same kind of money. They weren't really selling the records. But 10, 15 years later, people love them more, and they're talked about lovingly. They're still talked about, like all these bands we're influenced by, all the bands that are coming out are talking about how they're influenced by them. They become a cult classic. It becomes really cool to like them. And then they get back together too, and then they start playing bigger places than they did the first time around. And Jawbreaker has more of that. I think that's a very real thing in music. There's two, and you're lucky to get either one, because some bands get neither, but there are kind of two forms of like success. There's like the longevity of it, where it doesn't come right away. It may never come in a huge bulk, meaning, you may never sell all those records. You may never be the biggest, name in your genre. But throughout the years, you're remembered. People love it. People love your albums. You're still talked about. People still buy them. Once again, even if they don't go gold, it's like they're still steadily being sold. You can find them in record stores. They really do. They become the cool records, that people play when you go into a record store, or, talk about as their favorite albums. People love like 24-Hour Revenge Therapy, where, like I'm saying, there's so many albums from 1994 that probably sold a shit ton, that the people who bought them hardly remember them. They don't listen to them anymore. They don't remember the last time they listened to them. And who knows, there's a lot of people too who kind of laugh at the, who would look back at what they were listening to in 1994 and like, oh my God, I can't believe I was listening to that. Where with 24-Hour Revenge Therapy, it's like, no, people aren't embarrassed. You know what I mean? Like, no one's embarrassed in that. People, that's like credit, man. Like, if you meet someone who like was listening to when it came out, like actually knew Jawbreaker when Jawbreaker was a band the first time, that's amazing. You know what I mean? Like, it's just, there's such a difference in that, and I feel like bands are fortunate for either. I mean, any form of success is great, but there's the one where you kind of get it all in one sitting and it doesn't last. And then there's another one where you never really become that household name, but you stay, you know what I mean? You are remembered, like, and you also still get credit for it, I mean, like Jawbreaker now, like, I mean, getting back together, people care and people are coming to shows and, they're buying the merch and they're buying when they reissue the stuff on vinyl. So it's like, they are getting their due. It's maybe a little later, but I feel like most cult classic records are that way, Jawbreaker was more, I mean, it was always like that. The fans loved them, and I don't know that they were never really, I think, critic darlings, but I don't think they got terrible reviews for the most part. And the same with the Replacements, where it's like, music fans loved them, critics loved them. It was just, as far as selling records and the mainstream went, that was just a different story. And it's kind of the same thing with Jawbreaker. I feel like as far as punk goes, I mean, they're one of the most influential bands, in 24-Hour Revenge Therapy, one of the most, I would say, influential punk records of the 90s. I mean, whether it's the Lawrence Arms, whether it's Banner Pilot, I mean, just a couple off the top of my head. I mean, basically every band that's been signed to Fat Sense. I mean, there's just so many bands that just like, yeah, like that, Jawbreaker, or specifically 24-Hour Revenge Therapy, is like what got me writing music. I mean, there are constantly punk bands whose lyrics are being compared to Blake's. I mean, that's like a classic one. When a punk band is like starting and they sound anything like Jawbreaker, or sound like they're writing like Jawbreaker, I mean, right away they get compared to Blake, normally specifically like 24-Hour Revenge Therapy. I mean, like Alkaline Trio. I mean, Alkaline Trio came out a few years later, and I think they've said it before. You probably wouldn't have them without Jawbreaker. Like, you would not have Alkaline Trio without them. It just wouldn't be possible. So it's one of those things, like, you don't get your dues at the time, which I'm sure that has to be bittersweet, because it's like, it would also be nice at the time. Like, I'm sure it's great to get this like delayed gratification that, like, Jawbreaker is getting now. But at the same time, I'm sure it would have been nice to be able to, continue making music for a living and, not having to. I think all those guys have had, different day jobs and stuff. None of the guys in Jawbreaker ever made enough to be like, full-time musicians again after that. But, it's like now they're kind of getting it. But it does suck that it takes so long. I mean, it's great that it's happening. I think it's great that you get your dues anyways, that you're just getting them because you deserve them. But I also get that. It's like, it's also unfortunate that it couldn't have happened when they were a band, the first time around. But, I think 24 Hour Revenge Therapy is definitely that. It's a successful album, not in the sense that it sold, an ungodly amount, but it was a very successful record in that, I mean, people are still talking about it. It's influenced so many people in the punk genre, and I mean, so many other genres too. And, is I think it's just going to be loved more and more as time goes on, Same with Dear You, and I mean, just Jawbreaker as a whole, Because, I mean, we're, this month, February 2020 marks the 26th anniversary of 24 Hour Revenge Therapy coming out. And, that many years later, I mean, the album's almost, 4 years shy of 30 now. And I think it sounds timeless. I think it's a classic, and I don't see me listening to it less. Actually, throughout the years, I find myself listening to it more and more, to be quite honest. So, I'm sure that will continue. But just a huge influence on so many bands, so many artists, and just, people as a whole. Like, it's just such a great record, and talking about, the difference in similarities as well, like with Clarity, it's also that, Jimmy Eat World's an interesting one too, like talking about the backlash of like major labels. Like, I don't think Jimmy Eat World got any of that, because though part of the smart thing I think they had is they've basically always been on major labels. They released a few things beforehand, like I think by themselves. I think they were like self-released or maybe like on some small like indie Arizona labels. But like, I think everything they've put out just about has been on a major label. So it's like they kind of came from that scene, but it's like, I think it was a few years later. And I mean, I also don't know if they came from like the punk scene as much as like I don't think at the time they were calling it the emo scene, but you know what I mean? Like, they weren't coming from such, I think, a holier than thou scene as like Jawbreaker may have been, but I don't think they ever got the crap for being on a major label. It was never a thing, which is just unfortunate, because there's so many hardships that like, certain bands like Jawbreaker had from signing to a major label that ended up hurting the band that other bands just didn't have. I mean, no one was boycotting Jimmy Eat World because Clarity was on a major label. I mean, Static Prevails was on one as well. But, no one, I don't think anyone in Arizona was like, oh, that band who had a demo tape, how dare they be signed to Capitol Records? I don't think they really dealt with that, at all, really. But the other interesting thing, I think something very similar to 24 Hour Revenge and with Clarity, is neither of them are the band's debut records. This is not Jimmy Eat World's first record, and that was not Jawbreaker's first record. But I think it's their first records where they get their sound, where I think it really is a band that finally finds their sound. Like, Static Prevails is a good record, and, I'll go back to it and listen to it, but I'll normally pick out songs. It's one of those things, kind of like with Jawbreaker, like I was saying with their first two records. They're not bad, but I go back and I'll listen to certain songs off it. I'll listen to like 4 or 5 songs, and then not really listen to the rest of it. Whereas with Clarity, I want to listen to the whole damn thing. I mean, that whole record front to back is amazing, because it's a young band who's really finding their sound and still have that energy and that hunger for it. It's their second album on a major label, and I think, they were definitely, they were going for it. But at the same time, I think they were going for it, but they were going for what they wanted. I think there's songs on there that could be played on the radio as they did, like Lucky Denver Mint. But there's a lot of stuff on there that, is probably not what you would do if you were trying to make, the most commercially viable record, in 1999, which more respect to them, because the longevity of it, like with 24 Hour Revenge, is it's not a record being made to sell, 10 million copies. I'm sure they would have been happy if they did, but that wasn't the intentions with making it. So when it came out, maybe it didn't sell all those records then, but people still, I mean, Clarity is like quintessential, you know, and once again, they really weren't using the word emo then, and when they did, it was like a 4-letter word, you know. It's funny to think that. I really still don't love the term emo, but I use it because, I mean, you know, people, it's gotten to a point now where people use it and it's not like derogatory or demeaning or anything, so it's like, you know, I mean, it is a genre, but it's funny to think of, because it's the same thing with pop punk, you know. There's so many bands who, Newfound Glory being one of them, and, you know, I mean, they embrace the pop punk label, which I think, like, there's nothing wrong with that. They're a pop punk band. But, you know, you think about when they started, like in the early 2000s, they didn't like being called pop punk. There's interviews out there, like most bands didn't like that. Like, it's funny, Drive Through Records is like, I mean, my all-time favorite label, and I mean, quintessential pop punk label. But when they were like active and putting things out, those bands didn't want to be called pop punk. That was a demeaning thing. Like when people said that, same with emo, like that was not a lovable thing, not a term of endearment. Like, you know, that's really like more modern. You know, pop punk, it kind of happened to that, I feel like early 2010s. And then a few years later, around like probably like 2014, emo kind of became that, where it was like bands wanted to be called that, you know, they kind of started embracing it. But I mean, you think like 10 years prior to that, like 2004, no one wanted to be called emo or pop punk. Like those were not nice. Like I said, those not really terms of endearment, you know, so it's kind of funny how that changes through the years. But Jimmy Eat World's another one with like Clarity. Part of why I love it so much is that you really can't pinpoint. I mean, obviously emo it's like I was saying, you know, called like the quintessential emo record, but it's funny because their influences on it are so like they're all over the map in a really good way. Like it's hard to pinpoint exactly what you would call that as a genre, including at the time. I mean, now we call it emo. You know, it's a 20-year-old record, and you know, it's had its labels put on it for better or worse. But at the time when it comes out, if you listen to it, you're like, what would you call this? I mean, sure, there's songs that are kind of like, you know, there's a few kind of more straight up pop punk songs or punk songs. But then there's, you know, real, like I said, the opening track, Table for Glasses. Like, it's a very slow song. It has a build up, but never gets really heavy. You know, it's very, you know, it's slow. I mean, it is kind of ballady in a way. It's kind of melancholy as well. Like it's, and then to go into Lucky Denverment like that, you know, it's amazing. But those dynamics too, like I think that's part of why, because not only would people probably call it the quintessential emo album of all time, me personally, I think part of why I love it so much, that's the number one night drive record. Like if you're looking for a record to listen to while you're driving at night, like there's no better album. No album was made to be a better night drive record than that one. Like, I don't know that they set out to do that, and I would like to ask them that someday. Like, any of the guys in Jimmy Eat World, I'd love to ask them that. But it's like, did you set out to make such a good record to drive around at night and listen to? Because it really is. Like, that album sounds good any time of the year, any time of the day. But driving around when it's dark out, basically Clarity gets better after 9 p.m. Like if you're behind the wheel and it's past 9 p.m., that's when Clarity sounds best. Like I love to travel, and that's the album you listen to at night. Like there's just certain records. Saves the Day Through Being Cool does it for me too for a night drive. That one kind of gets you more pumped up though. I like that one for like driving down the interstate fast at night. Whereas like Clarity, you could be doing that, but you could also just be going down back winding country roads at night. I mean, you could be driving anywhere at night. It's like there's just an ambiance and just this vibe of the album that's really, it doesn't matter if the song is more ballady, if it's like an alternative rock song, if it's a punk song, you know, it doesn't matter what, even an electronic song. I mean, there's so much programming on that record, just sounds amazing, you know, which I would say, I think partly Jimmy Eat World, because I think they've continued it through the years, but I would also say it's probably partly, you know, in credit to Mark Trombino, the producer of that one. I think he probably had a good amount to do with that. I know he is credited for some of the programming and sequencing on it, you know, so he probably knew, just assuming too, because I mean, that wasn't his first rodeo, you know, he'd produced some other bands before them, but with Jimmy Eat World still being a younger band, I'm sure he had like I don't know how much he had in that, but like for like Goodbye Sky Harbor, like I wonder with things like that, like how much that like outro, like, you know, was the band's idea versus what he was doing, you know, like how much of that Mark Trombino put together. Like, I mean, it's a very interesting album. Like, I love talking to producers, and Mark Trombino would be amazing to talk to, specifically for Clarity, because there's just so much going on that record, So I think that would be really cool to talk to him about that. Like, I mean, because some of the guys in Jimmy Eat World did the programming and sequencing as well, but he also did, and I just wonder how much, Mark really did. I mean, because he produced so many other amazing albums too. And I mean, he's another one, just one of the best producers out there. And I think he really shined on Clarity. I think that's one we really got to give credit to the producer. And I mean, he worked with Jimmy Eat World on, most of their records. I mean, he's produced, as far as Jimmy Eat World goes, before Clarity, he produced Static Prevails. He produced Futures, Bleed American, Invented. I mean, he hasn't produced like the last 2 records, and he didn't produce like Chase This Light. So of all, Jimmy Eat World's now been a band for 20-something years, and Mark Trombino's produced like, I'd say 70% of their records. You know what I mean? So it's like he is kind of, in a way, almost like an unofficial member of the band, or like the unofficial like 5th member of Jimmy Eat World. And I just think that with a band who's really finding their sound was just, it was a recipe for success. Clarity front to back is just amazing. And I think it's, now this is where I think 24 Hour Revenge kind of differs from Clarity. Like 24 Hour Revenge does some different things, but it's like overall, I think there's like a certain tone of the album, and a lot of the songs, including the songs that I love, like the up-tempo punk songs, do sound similar. I mean, there's a few songs on 24 Hour Revenge Therapy that if you put them back to back, you'd kind of go like, oh, that's almost the same song. Jinx Removing and Boat Dreams from the Hill, which I think Chris joked about it in that interview I was reading with them from last year about the record. But I think he said that it's like you can't play those 2 songs together. Like, I think they said playing it live, it's like they'll never play Boat Dreams from the Hill next to Jinx Removing, because musically they're the same song. Different lyrics, but it's like they're both fast. They're both like the same. I think they're both in G major. Like, they're both about the same tempo. Like, the only real difference is the lyrics. So, like, I think that's the difference, where I think on 24 Hour Revenge Therapy, the songs, not that they all sound identical, but it's like, they still kind of keep to a certain sound there. Whereas I feel like on Clarity, Jawbreaker, Jimmy Eat World, they kind of go the other way, and I feel like they try out different things. Like, it's not the same band from Static Prevails. It's not the same band at all. I think this is a band who really found their sound in between, wrote even better songs, and I think really did push themselves. They did some stuff on there. Same with the programming and stuff like that. It's like there's songs that are more punk on there, but it's like then they're also doing things with like, that did kind of sound not electronica, not like the songs sounded electronica, but it's like there were electronic elements to the songs, electric drums or programmed drums and stuff, like just different things like that, like, sampling of things, like things that your normal punk band probably wouldn't do, thus it kind of got its own thing and is now credited as like, bringing emo to the mainstream or making it what it is, up there with like Something to Write Home About by the Get Up Kids. It's just one of those records. And, it's from taking chances, I think. Had they just done Static Prevails, like if they just did those songs, like more like just a 4-piece band with like, electric guitars and bass, it's like it just, it probably could have been good, but it would have been the same record. Like there's a few just straight up rockers on that one. Like Blister and 10, like those 2 jump out, like, and they're 2 of like my favorite songs on the album. But it's like, if all the songs sounded like that, I don't think it would make for as good of a record. I think what makes it so good is the variety, is that, it changes up and that it's very different. And I would think Mark Trombino probably had a lot to do with that too, because as a young band, I'm sure Jimmy Eat World had less confidence than they do now. They can, like on this last record, they did 555, and it sounds nothing like Jimmy Eat World. It's so different, and it sounds great. It's a great song, and I think it's probably one of the most popular one off their last record. But I think at this point they're also these guys know what they're doing. I don't think they're afraid to try different things. But I think that starts at Clarity. You know, they had to start somewhere with that. And I think they have a band who's never been afraid to take chances, but that starts somewhere. And I think it starts with Clarity. You know, they did that on Clarity and it became such, you know, I mean, absolutely such a success. Most people will tell you, now there's two people, and I guess there's a third, because I have like one friend who says Bleed American is his favorite Jimmy Eat World record. And fair enough, that's a great record. But just about everyone you're ever going to meet who's a Jimmy Eat World fan, you know, or who likes them more than just their singles, it's either going to be Clarity or Future. Those are the two that are everyone's favorite. I like Futures, but Futures doesn't have that same. It lacks what Clarity has. You know, it kind of has an ambiance. I think also a similarity. Another great like night drive record, but Jimmy Eat World's also, they're the kings of that. Like if you want a band to put on when you're driving late at night, it's Jimmy Eat World. Like they're a good excuse just to go drive. Even if you have nowhere to go to, they're just like Jimmy Eat World's an excuse to just get in your car and drive at night and just listen to Jimmy Eat World while you drive. Like that's an excuse enough. Putting Clarity on is an excuse enough to drive around at night, you know. But I mean that like in such a great way. Like I think that's a powerful thing to be that kind of band, that it's like you're perfect for a certain mood. You know, I think most bands would kill for something like that. And I mean, Jimmy Eat World just did it with Clarity. I mean, I love all their records. There's good songs on all their albums, but it's like Clarity is just the one. It's like something about it is just absolutely amazing. And I think it's variety. I think variety is like really, it does it favors. There's bands kind of go out their comfort zones and it doesn't do them any favors. You see their weak points, and then it's like it's trial and error, but it's recorded. You know, you kind of learn from that what the band's strong suits are. You go, well, you know, like if Clarity came out not good, you might go, oh, they were better on Static Prevails. Like they were better as just, you know, a pop punk band. Like they were better not doing this kind of electronic stuff or like this programming and all that, or like a 16-minute, you know, like outro. Like they were better just more as a pop punk band, whereas it wasn't like that. They ended up being very successful, and I think everyone kind of liked where they were going. I think very, very few people are going to tell you that Jimmy Eat World were only good before Clarity. You know, like with Jawbreaker, there are some people who would probably tell you that you know, nothing after Bivouac was good, or nothing after 24-Hour Revenge Therapy was good, because there are still some people who don't like Dear You, but I think most people like Dear You now. I mean, my absolute favorite Jawbreaker record, one of my favorite records of the 90s. But you know, Jimmy Eat World, I don't think they have that so much. I think most people would agree it's like, yeah, they just got better, like Clarity and On. You know, I mean, the earlier stuff is good, but it's like most people want to hear Clarity and On. Where Jawbreaker, you got people in different places. You know, I mean, same with the Replacements. I mean, they don't have one album that everyone kind of says. You know, like with Jimmy Eat World, it's Clarity or Futures, but I would say more Clarity. I mean, you do get people who like Futures, but I would even say that I've met more people who like Clarity, and those people are right. The people who think Futures is the best, that's like their second best record. Let's agree to disagree, if you want, But, you know, like there's other bands like with the Replacements where it's like it's just so different. You'll find people who only like, you know, the twin tone stuff. You'll find people there's people who only like the last two records, people who absolutely hate those last two records, people who think their best one was Pleased to Meet Me. You know, there's people who like them better with Slim. There's better people who like with Bob Stinson. Like it goes all over, where Jimmy Eat World doesn't have that as much. You know, they have less drama around that, or less like, you know, like music politics are like, oh, you think that's their best album? No, this is their best album. You know, I don't think Jimmy Eat World has that as much, but, you know, which I guess is probably a good thing. I don't think you really need that around your music. But, I mean, the multi-genre thing is just really, I think, part of what gave Clarity, you know, it just why it's such a strong record. Like, you know, it's because you start to dissect these. You know, it's funny because you go like, you know, why do I love these records? Why do I love 24-Hour Revenge? Why do I love Clarity? And you start to dissect it, because really, at first you just go, I like the songs. But you start looking and you're going, well, they did this on that record. And I also noticed that, you know, both of them did this on these records. So it's like, obviously, those are the things that I like on them. And it's interesting when you start breaking them down, you think of why you like them or why they're so big, you know. But both of them are no-brainers to me why I think they're cult classics now. You know, I mean, why I think people would pay a pretty penny to hear Jawbreaker do 24-Hour Revenge Therapy front to back. And really, you know, I don't know if people really know this, but like, you know, obviously now the 10-year anniversary tour, and now it's becoming like 15 and 20-year anniversary tour, but basically just anniversary tours where bands play their albums front to back. Like, I don't know if people realize this, but like Jimmy Eat World was really like one of the first ones to do that. I mean, there's other bands in history who have played their albums front to back, but it's like as far as an anniversary tour goes, they're like the first one I can think of back in 2009 for Clarity's 10-year tour. Like that was huge. Like that was humongous. Including, I mean, if you just want to even get specific, in the scene, they are the first ones to do it. I mean, I can't think of anyone else. You know, I'm sure there's other people in music who have, but they're in the scene, like that opened the floodgates. You know, a couple years later, including around like 2011, 2012, like all these bands started doing anniversary tours and stuff. Jimmy Eat World was the first one to do it, you know. And you kind of respect them too. I mean, I would have liked them to do a 20-year tour last year for a Clarity because I like Jimmy Eat World enough, but I hadn't heard Clarity until 2011. You know, I was very I like the radio hits, but I didn't really know much else. I think I might have had a copy of Futures at that point, but did not hear Clarity. So when they did that tour, it really wasn't, like my thing. I wasn't like jumping up to go see it. Whereas like 20-year tour came around or 20 years came around, I'm like, oh my God, I wish they'd do the tour. You know, I'd love to see, this is an album you want to see performed front to back. You know, I mean, absolutely. It's an album to hear played live. You know, I think there's reason to do it. You know, it's an interesting album and it just goes so many places. And it's so interesting that it would be cool, to hear it converted live, But I mean, just such a classic record. I mean, Jawbreaker and Jimmy Eat World, I don't think they ever played any shows. There was an overlap, I believe. Like, Jimmy Eat World was basically becoming a band as Jawbreaker was like on their way out. As they were breaking up, Jimmy Eat World was kind of getting together, kind of, learning their sound and, kind of becoming who they became. But I mean, like, once Clarity came out, Jawbreaker was already broken up for a few years. And I don't know, like Jets to Brazil might have played some shows with like Jimmy Eat World, but I don't know that Jimmy Eat World ever played with Jawbreaker. They might have now at a festival. I could see that. I could see them both being on lineups for festivals the last few years. But I don't know if they were ever on one. I would think the guys in Jimmy Eat World, though, were probably Jawbreaker fans. I'm pretty sure it's safe to say that those were influential albums on them. But it's also just funny, really like also showing you that, like, what a broad spectrum, like, kind of, and I am using it very broad, but, the punk scene is. Because when I say punk, I mean, you have pop punk, emo, like indie rock, alternative, like all these different things like under that, where it's funny because all different have different, reactions. Like Jimmy Eat World was still kind of in a scene similar to Jawbreaker. Like they weren't that different, you know what I mean? Like you could see them playing shows together if they're like one-offs, somewhere. Like they're really not that different, but it's like you see the different reactions to like being on a major label and stuff. Like you see the different reactions from their fans, like I think like Jimmy Eat World can take more chances as they have throughout their career, where Jawbreaker didn't have that as much, And I think that's part of what Blake was bitching about though in those songs is kind of that, a band who wanted to do different things, who, were in a scene that didn't want them to, who it's like who love you for what you put out, but it's like the second you try to do anything else or try to get out of that box that they put you in, they're pissed. And I think punk's gotten better at that, because I also just think everything's become like that, like just so many different genres now that there's really not like, I don't feel like the holier than thou exists as much anymore. I just think there's so much out there, and I don't, I think bands just tour with bands who kind of like that, who it's like, a band who might be considered more punk or heavier than this band who's more pop punk and have more pop sensibilities, but they'll still tour together. Like I don't think that animosity and all that really exists so much in music, which is a good thing. But it's like I also think that just documents it, because you look at these albums that, are now cult classics that when they came out were looked at differently, did not sell super well. I mean, like I said, Clarity, if Clarity sold well, they wouldn't have gotten dropped from a major label. Like Capitol would have kept them if Clarity sold, 2 million records. It didn't do that, And, funny enough with Jawbreaker, theirs, that one, which sounds way less mainstream than Clarity does, that one got them a major label deal, but I mean, also ended up, imploding them, or one of the things, I think a couple different things imploded them. But that definitely did them no favors. And, just very interesting, two bands. So you saw Jimmy Eat World after Clarity, continue on with all these albums, still going strong all these years later, still putting out great records. I mean, Surviving was one of my favorite records of last year. And you have other bands like Jawbreaker who it's like it killed them. We got 4 albums out of them, and that's all she wrote. Maybe we'll get something again, but still, there's like a 20-year gap in between, new music, at least. Actually, it's been over that now because Dear You came out in, I believe, 96. I want to say 96 or 97. Dear You came out. Probably 96 because I think they were broken up by 97. So, but you think of that, and yeah, that was their last album, so that's more like 24 years ago. It's been quite a while since we've got any new music from Jawbreaker, but I would love to hear what a Jawbreaker record sounds like, 24, 25 years later. That would be extremely interesting. But that is going to be the episode for this week. I just wanted to kind of come on and, kind of talk about this. We had a whole different episode for you, but like I said, you'll never hear that one. But I think this one kind of came out better. This one's a little more coherent, I'll say, than the last one. We had an interesting time with said guest, and who knows, said guest might even be on it at another time. So won't throw anyone under the bus, but I really did enjoy this. Talking about these records, two records that really kind of come from the same genre, but are kind of distant enough, But I feel like most people still love them both. I feel like it's not crazy to find someone who loves both those records. I think as time has went on too, it's allowed you to. Maybe when they came out, like say in the 90s, it may have been blasphemous to be, a Jawbreaker fan, but like Jimmy Eat World, like you may get some shit for that. Whereas now people don't do that. I think they also realize how similar they are, which I've always felt that way. And, I do that like on the radio show. It's like if you look at the stuff I play, a lot of it is, sure, they're bands who are different, but it's like I see commonalities in like Big Star and Jawbreaker and the Replacements and the Get Up Kids and like, even like Blink-182 or something. Like I think you can find things in there where you go, okay, these bands aren't the same. I'm not saying they're like totally the same, but I'm like, if you like this sound, I don't get how you wouldn't like this. Like there you can make it coherent enough where it makes sense, and you go, no, these two work together. And I think Jawbreaker and Jimmy Eat World are that. Two bands where, okay, they don't sound identical, but it's like if you like one, you probably would like the other. And the other thing, too, if you're listening to this and have never heard 24-Hour Revenge Therapy or Clarity, you got to go listen to those records. If you're new to those bands, those are great introductions to the bands. I think if you like those records, go ahead and, check out the rest of them, though. Jimmy Eat World's a pretty damn big band, and, Jawbreaker's not super small either. So I would assume you've probably heard them, and a high five to you for having good taste in music. But if you've not heard them, go check them out. You are not going to regret it. And also credit to you for listening to this, for albums that you haven't heard. I give you credit for checking this out. And thank you very much for checking out the Power Chord Hour podcast. But like I said, that's going to be the episode for this week. Very happy anniversary to both of those. 24-Hour Revenge Therapy turning 26 this year. And Clarity turning 21. Clarity is old enough to drink now. And 24-Hour Revenge Therapy is only a year older than me, actually. So I don't know which one of us is aging better. 24-Hour Revenge has aged pretty damn well. So I don't know. I'll leave that up to you guys. You can be the judge of that. But thank you very much for checking out the show this week. Stay connected with us. We are online at Power Chord Radio on YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. We're on Spotify. I put up playlists from the radio show every week if you want to hear what I'm playing on the radio show. But you missed it, you can go check out our Spotify playlist. And I put up other special playlists too. Normally at least one playlist a week. But I've also been putting up my favorite songs the last decade. We're up to 2015 right now. As you're listening to this, 2016 is probably going to be out in the next few days. And yeah, check that out. Maybe you missed some music this last decade, or maybe you forgot about some stuff. So I'll school you on that. But check us out there. We're also, I guess we're on SoundCloud too. And I don't put the podcast up there, but some of our old interviews are there. If that's your thing, if you're ever on SoundCloud, and for whatever reason you're just on SoundCloud board, look up Power Chord Hour, and I don't know, like a handful of our interviews are on there. We ran out of space, so I quit putting things on there because I don't think people use SoundCloud a ton for that. Probably for podcasts more. I probably should put these podcasts up. Let me know that as well. If you listen to podcasts on SoundCloud, let me know, because if it's a place where I think people will check them out, maybe I'll start putting them up there. But hit me up, powerchordhour@gmail.com. I love doing this show. Anyone who listens, I really do appreciate it and want them as part of the show. So let me know stuff like that, to use SoundCloud to listen to it. Let me know, also, what are your favorite 90s records? Obviously, it was a very 90s-centric episode talking about two of my favorite records of the decade. But let me know some of your favorite 90s records that you think like, didn't get the credit they deserve. Maybe weren't the best sellers, but you think were the best albums of the 90s, Like neither of these albums were the best sellers of their years, Clarity probably wasn't even in the top 500 best-selling records of 1999, Same with Jawbreaker. So it's like, tell me some of your favorite, like, underrated records of the 90s that you think, should just be bigger, everyone should check out. But hit me up, powerchordhour@gmail.com. I also have some new Power Chord Hour pins, so hit me up on that email, and I'll send you some absolutely free. I'm going to have a few Power Chord Hour t-shirts left, so if you want one of those, I have like 2 or 3 left. So if you want one, hit me up. You can have one totally free. But until next episode, I'll be back next week with a February rundown for you, let you know the music came out this month. Play you some new music, all that good stuff. That'll be next week. But until then, for the Power Chord Hour podcast, I'm Anthony Merchant, and thank you so much for listening.